Thank you, everybody, for joining us here at Epoch Experience. I am here with Simon Bucher, the Director of History and Geography in Tomb Raider, a YouTube series that delves into the history of the Tomb Raider series, more specifically the first three entries from way back in the day. So, Simon, thank you for joining us here today. Like I had said before, we kind of stumbled across your project and we're really thrilled by it. It's very in-depth. You clearly put a lot of time into it. But before we even get into that, I'm kind of interested in your background in history because you seem to have kind of a very keen interest in it. It sounded like it actually started with gaming and Tomb Raider.
I believe it did. I believe it started with Tomb Raider, actually. The more I think about it, the more I come to the conclusion that I owe my passion for history to video games. As nerdy as that may sound, but I think that's the truth.
Nothing wrong with that.
And yeah, and Tomb Raider was the first game I ever played, as far as I can recall, at a very young age, back when it came out in the late 90s. So and that just drew me in, that the whole atmosphere and the historical atmosphere, the adventuring, that kind of attracted me to history.
And did that follow you into schooling? Were you kind of big into history when you were in high school, and that even post-education, anything
It
like that?
did. It did, to a degree. I struggle a lot with grades in history class, which is still one of my biggest problems with the way history is being taught, because it's always very, date and name heavy, which it doesn't have to be. And I think that's why video games drew me in, because it's very immersive and you get to feel the history more. And but throughout school, I was always interested in history, more so in the niche subjects that weren't really taught about, but it followed me throughout my whole life so far.
And was there something specific about Tomb Raider? I know it was pretty much like the first big series that tackled history in a somewhat realer sense. Was it just the adventure to it? Did you just like exploring like these real locations?
I think I think that was the biggest part of it, yeah, because it's based in reality. It's based in real life locations, to some degree. It obviously takes a lot of creative liberty and stuff like that, but it's very real. It feels very real, and especially back in the day when everything was like blocky graphics and stuff, it felt real, and I think that's what made it feel so alive.
And was there a what were there? There were three original ones. Did you have a preference of the three?
I think there's a, depending on how you count them, but there's six original ones, if you will. But the first three ones are definitely the ones that are considered the classics, or the first four ones. And the fourth one is actually my favorite. That one came out in 1999. It takes place entirely in Egypt, and that was also, as far as I can remember, the first Tomb Raider game that I ever played. So holds a special place in my heart.
Oh, okay, so you didn't even get to start with the very first.
Yeah, because the first one came out the year I was born. So um, yeah, I didn't play that as my first game.
Okay. So thinking back to when you first started playing Tomb Raider, and then you got into schooling, and do you think if something like that was integrated into your curriculum that you maybe would have had a better time in school, or do you think maybe that should be something considered for future generations?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a big passion of mine, sort of advocating for that. I just talked to a colleague of mine the other day about this exact issue, or if it is an issue. But I think that games in general, video games in general, they have a lot of potential for historical education in school and in higher education. I think they're they're very valuable if used right. Obviously, you have to put a lot of thought into what you do with the games and how you present them and stuff like that. But generally speaking, I think engaging students with video games, historical video games, or games that deal with history in some way is a great idea. I think it's a good idea.
Okay. And so Tomb Raider is a bit more based in fantasy, but as you broke down in your series, and we'll get into that in a little bit, do you think series like that kind of have the authenticity to also be viewed as a learning tool?
I think Tomb Raider is a bad example for that, but yes and no, because it's, I mean, in that way, it would probably be a bad example if you used it for teaching about history, because it, as you said, it's very fantasy based. At the same time, it's, like I said, in takes place in real life historical locations. But I think if anything, it would be a good tool to show people that how history is being recreated or being used in popular media, and if it's done in a right or a wrong way, or if there is a right or wrong way. So I think it could be used in that way.
Okay, that I think I have to agree with you on that point. So I do want to get into the YouTube series, but before we do, I noticed that you are a Roman numismatist, and I have to
Yes.
know, you started with Tomb Raider. How did you like kind of work your way up to, and that's the study of kind of ancient coins, correct?
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah, it was a long and windy road to get there. I always knew I wanted to do something based around history, whatever that may be, but I never really had a specific idea of like what kind of job do I want to do, what kind of profession. I graduated high school thinking I was going to study archaeology, but then I didn't do that, and I started studying linguistics instead. And then a few years later, I sort of rediscovered my passion for history, and so I switched to a different degree, and then I started getting into coins as well as a primary source for ancient history, and that is sort of a newfound passion, a recent passion, and that's when I started pursuing that.
Was there something about ancient money that kind of drew you to it, or did it just like an interest sparked as you were studying history?
Pretty much. They came up in different lectures and different classes. We use them as sort of like hands-on sources in a lot of classes. And the university where I study and work, we have our own collection of coins, and so I always was around them. And I think that's what made them so interesting for me, because you can look at them, you can touch them, you can turn them around, you can look at them up close. So it's like you're very connected with the history you're studying through the coins.
Do you have, so when you're playing games now, so like games like Assassin's Creed or like anything that goes back in time, are you more focused on the currency that's used, do you find?
Sometimes I'm drawn to it, even in non-historical games, like even in fantasy games. The Elder Scrolls comes to mind. I'm always interested in what kind of currency do they use. Like it's mostly gold coins and the old school fantasy games, role-playing games. But I'm always I find myself wondering what are the different what kind of coins do they have, how could you break them down. Like I'm very technical like that when it comes to coins. But yeah.
Sorry. Have you noticed kind of a connection between, say, games like Elder Scrolls and real historic money?
Definitely. I read I think it was a blog post the other day, talking about the money in the Elder Scrolls games. They're called septims, and they're these bigger gold coins, and they bear the portrait of a fictional emperor from the series, and it's essentially based on Roman coinage. It's very, like the Roman emperor is on the front of the coin, and then on the back you have different symbols relating to the dynasty. So a lot of these games take inspiration from real life money.
Okay. So let us shift to why we're here, and that's for the History and Geography and Tomb Raider series. It's a
Yes,
3-part series. Do you have a fourth one planned, or is that kind of where it's going to cut off at this point?
I do have a fourth one planned. I'm working on it. I have a fifth and sixth and seventh one planned in theory. Pretty much, I want to cover the whole series of Tomb Raider games at
Oh,
the
okay.
end. So it's pretty much an open project.
Oh, very nice. Oh, it's exciting because the first 3 are fascinating. And for
Thank
anybody that
you.
hasn't
Thank you very
kind of
much.
come across them yet, they're about an hour long each episode, and they're really thorough about, even kind of surprised by uh, how much you look at and how deep you kind of get into even these like small segments in the game that they're
Yes.
important because they're all part of the adventure, but they're not part of the kind of the major plot that's going on. So I have to
Yes,
assume
absolutely.
even one episode of that is going to take a long time. So what was the reason you really launched into those, knowing that this was going to be a lot of work?
Yeah, you can say that again. It's a ton of work, especially because I edit all of it by myself, so it takes forever. But initially it kind of started as a blog post almost, back on a Tumblr profile I used to have, and I just wrote up these, like sort of walkthroughs through the history and the geography of those games. And I thought to myself, this would make for a good YouTube video. And then I sat down and started researching a bit, and it was going to be a short video, maybe 15 minutes. But then I realized this would also make for a good documentary. So I started combining a lot of these elements, and sat down and actually, wrote a proper script for the first episode, and it developed into this whole like web series. And so it started as a small hobby project, but then it became something much bigger.
Okay, and the production value is very impressive. For I assume it's mostly a one-man production outside of the narration and the art that you have here and there.
Pretty much. I do get a lot of help from different community members from the Tomb Raider community. Before I made the first one, I actually wrote a big post on the Tomb Raider forums about it, and I asked for opinions, for help, for contributions, and a lot of people sent fan art they wanted me to use, and a lot of people had different, tips and advice for me. And then also someone by the name of Zebra, a user on that forum, messaged me, and he suggested making animations, like professional animations, and he's a 3D animator. And so he made the intro for me, and he made a lot of the maps that you see in the videos, and the journeys that Lara goes on. So I have a lot of help from other people, and the narration, obviously you mentioned that, and friends have made music for it. So I do the editing, I do the biggest part of it, but I have a lot of help from friends.
Okay, well, it's nice that it's a community effort. I think that's something people don't
Yes.
realize, both about gaming and even I would have to some historical research. that it's not usually just one person doing something. There's a lot of behind the scenes and a lot of
Absolutely.
kind of hands involved. In fact, one of those that I was quite impressed with was the first episode was narrated by Shelley Blonde, who
Yes.
was the Lara Croft from the 1996 release. And I have to know what was. I mean, it makes sense, obviously, but how did that kind of come about?
Yes, it's crazy, isn't it? Especially for someone who, grew up playing that game as a kid and having, hearing Lara talk, and then suddenly you work with that person. It's kind of surreal. Um, but it was a very straightforward interaction. I think it was when I uploaded that post on the Tomb Raider forums. One of the biggest, almost flagship figures in the Tomb Raider community, Ash Kaprielov, who's also a video game journalist. He messaged me and he asked. He's friends with Shelley, and he asked me if he should contact her for me, and if I wanted her to narrate the whole thing. And obviously I said yes. And so he gave me her information, and we talked via email, and then we set the whole thing up. So it was very very quick and simple. A few
Okay,
steps.
I mean, it's perfect. That is definitely, if you're going to launch something about Tomb Raider, having that name and that voice behind it is really the best way to go.
Right.
Have you gotten any support from like Square or Crystal Dynamics, in terms of even if they've like retweeted something of yours?
I have not, as far as I'm concerned. I have gotten a ton of support by fan sites and community members, who in turn are affiliated with Square and Crystal, and core design members, even the original developers. So through them, I've sort of had the companies recognize it, I believe, but
Okay.
not direct contact.
Okay. Well, I mean, hopefully it's still, things can pick up.
Sure. I mean, I
I
wouldn't say no
randomly,
to that.
if I can randomly come across it, I'm sure somebody as part of those teams would be able to as well.
Yes, and the community leaders are very active on social media as well, and they engage with fans and fan creations. So
Yeah,
it's not impossible.
no, definitely not, and especially if you're going to keep going with the fourth one, which
Yes.
so the first three were about, essentially covered the original trilogy. Where would you go if you're willing to say with a fourth? Are you just going to go progression through the series, or
Yes.
okay?
Yes. That's a plan. So one episode per game.
Okay, and leading into even the reboot series.
I'm still on the fence about that because it's a very self-explanatory game, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's very, very blockbuster, very Hollywood movie. And you have tons of these, optional collectibles. You have journal entries, and you have cutscenes explaining everything. So I think the appeal is more with the older games because there's a lot of interpreting to do. So that's where my series comes in.
Okay. So when you think of the reboot series compared to the original one, which do you think handled the history or the historical aspects of it a little better?
Um, well, I want to say the old ones, but I can't because that would be a lie. It's definitely the reboot trilogy that did the best job with that, but simply because it's more recent, it's modern. The developers had access to all sorts of historical research. They had access to historians. The Crystal Dynamics team went on different trips around the world to take pictures of everything, which the core design team back in the day did as well. But it was much more limited with what they could do in the game. So the Reboot series is definitely more accurate in terms of historical research. But you know, you have to give the old games credit because we're talking mid '90s and a very small team of a handful of developers. And for the research they had access to, they did a great job making those games and the worlds and the history of them.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that was pre-internet heyday, so everything's done
Yes.
in these physical books that you know you don't really have to touch these days. So definitely,
Right.
definitely kudos to the team for kind of making these, you know, not as expansive as the reboot, but you still get a sense that it's not just what Lara Croft sees. There's way more beyond it.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's not important to the game, so there's no reason to put the resources into it. Um, So, okay, so you've got a plan for Tomb Raider. Do you have another series that you would want to tackle? I know, you know, first thing that comes to everybody's mind would be Uncharted, but it's not
Yes.
just Tomb Raider versus Uncharted. There are dozens of other series you could cover.
Yes. Yes. Uncharted is also the first thing that came to mind when I thought about maybe this sort of style of video would work for a different game. But then, you know, I came to the same conclusion because the modern Tomb Raider games are essentially very similar to the Uncharted games, and it wouldn't make much sense portraying those games in the way that I did with the other ones. But what I think is a gold mine of historical videos is Assassin's Creed, um, especially the more recent entries, the last three games, um, Origins and Odyssey, which also take place in antiquity. They even have this discovery tool that you can use, so you could use it to record gameplay and footage of the historical sites. So I think I'm going to look into that after this series.
Okay, I mean that is an undertaking and a half. But we've actually covered that.
Yes.
It's forget is it just called the Discovery Tool? It essentially takes away all the gameplay and just leaves you with this big open
Exactly.
world that they've worked on, and it's beautiful and kind of amazing to just walk through and see. Um, but I think I didn't even think of that. That is a great idea to take those. It was in Origins, Odyssey. Was it in Valhalla? I think it was in Valhalla. Or they're adding it
I'm
later.
not sure. I haven't played that one yet. Yeah, but I think they're probably going to add it in a upcoming DLC. I can imagine.
I would think so because I know it did pretty well. People were excited about it in the last two. So okay, so Assassin's Creed. You know, that would be very fascinating to see, but also, man, that would take a lot of time.
Definitely, it probably wouldn't work if I did it like I did with the Tomb Raider games, where I go, this is the story. This happens, then this happens, then this happens. It
Yeah.
would probably make more sense to pick certain aspects of the game, like how is the city of Alexandria portrayed in the game, and is it accurate?
Yeah. I think that would be a better approach. Yeah, if you try to just piece
Yeah,
the story out, you would be there forever. You know,
definitely. It would be a 8 hour marathon at least.
that would be very nice. Is there another series
Yeah.
that kind of comes to mind, or are you kind of maybe hyper focused
Um,
or want to be hyper focused on Assassin's Creed?
I'm thinking I've been thinking about this a lot as well because I'm getting more and more into this genre of historical video games. And I've been thinking, what about the not so historical video games? What about fantasy games? Like we talked about Elder Scrolls earlier, stuff like that. It obviously takes a lot of inspiration from real life history, from ancient history. A lot of these role playing games are inspired by the Middle Ages, stuff like that. So I was thinking, I recently replayed the Dark Souls trilogy, and you notice quite a few elements that have been borrowed from Greek mythology or Roman history. There's like subtle details where you're like, this seems familiar. I think I know where this comes from. So maybe that's interesting for people to see. you know, I don't know if you're familiar with the Dark Souls
Of course.
mythology. Yeah. And you know, stuff like Gwyn is probably obviously inspired by Seuss and you know, stuff like that. I think that's interesting to look at.
I think not only is that interesting for players, I think that's also important for historical gaming as a genre. Because when you think of historical gaming, or when I'm sure most people do, they think of games like Tomb Raider, Assassin's Creed, Age of Empires. They think
Hmm.
very strictly like something rooted in history that they can look at, flip to a page in a textbook, and they'd be able to read about, Egypt. But you're right, in games like
Yeah.
Dark Souls, Elder Scrolls, a lot of fantasy games are pulling from real mythology, which is part of history, and kind of tweaking it.
Hmm.
Um, and that's
Hmm.
really what a lot of mythology is just pulling from somebody else's story and saying, well, I want to, it's going to read like this. Like Roman and Greek mythology are very much the same in a lot of areas and aspects.
Yeah.
Um, I think for a video series, that would be very interesting to kind of break down
Hmm.
how these stories link up to real stories that we've been reading for years and decades and so on.
Absolutely. And you have to remember these developers probably read the same stories, right? So
Yeah.
um, they were inspired by it as well. So it's interesting to look at what aspects they use.
So now thinking of like the development side of things, do you have any interest in taking part in something like that? Because there is there is a need for people that know how to research history, because it's not as easy as just going to a textbook. If you want to make it as authentic as
Hmm.
possible, there's a lot to it, and that's kind of what we do here at Epoch. Is that something you're ever interested in, or do you want to kind of keep to just looking at these stories, breaking them down, and sticking to your historian position?
Hmm. Hmm. I do think about it. I'm sort of at this point in my life or my career, if you will, where where I'm thinking, you know, where do I go? What do I pursue? I'm finishing my master's degree. I'm focusing heavily on, you know, public history. How is history portrayed in popular media, in video games, in movies? So I think I'd love to be part of a, you know, a developing process or a creational process like that. Not sure about the details or who I get in touch with, who I'd work with, or something like that. But it's very fascinating. I think I enjoy the you know, outsider perspective, more looking at the finished product and picking it apart. But I yeah, I think it'd be fun to be part of a creation like that.
Okay. Is there a game you're kind of looking forward to, historical or not, really?
Mm, I can't think of one, which is odd.
It's kind of a there's a rough patch
I
coming.
cannot think of a game.
Yeah, it's a little.
It kind of is, isn't it?
It is. It is. They've got a lot of focus on the next gen consoles, so the libraries are a little. There's a lot coming out, but nothing that's kind of really going to break waves. And in terms
Yeah,
of historical gaming, you're really looking at games like God of War and Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed, just filling that void over and over again.
yeah, that's true. That's true. I am interested to see where the Tomb Raider series is going. They finished the reboot trilogy, so we're kind of left in the open right now, speculating what they're going to do with the character and the name. So I'm interested to see where they're headed.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I played the third one a while ago, but it ended on an open note, didn't it? Where her story could still kind of build up.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So I would
Um,
assume, especially since they're really successful, that there is going to be, um, I guess I wouldn't call it a fourth entry because they did say specifically that the trilogy is done.
mhm.
But yeah, there's definitely room for more, and I wouldn't be surprised if you got an announcement in the next like year or two.
Oh, definitely. I want to believe.
All right, so speaking of Tomb Raider, you know, we've got the games, but we also have movies, and I'd kind of like to hear where you stand on the original two, I think it was, and then there was the one
Right.
that came out what, 2 or 3 years
Yes.
ago.
Yes. Oh, I love them. I love them. I'm a huge fan of them. The first two ones with Angelina Jolie, they fall in the same category, and sort of I sort of place them in the nostalgia drawer because, you know, I was very young when they came out, and they're the first one, especially the first Tomb Raider movie, I believe it was 2001 it came out. It's just a great it's a great movie. It's a great movie. It got a lot of back critiques when it came out, because trashing on video game adaptations was sort of a trend back then. Still is, I guess.
Yeah.
But it objectively, it's a great adaptation of the Tomb Raider series. It did everything right. It portrayed Lara Croft in an accurate manner. It got the whole for me, it caught the feeling of the feeling you get when you play the first few Tomb Raider games, and it translated that feeling onto the big, you know, silver screen. So the first two movies are very fun, and the reboot movie that came out a few years ago, it's not as good as the game it's based on. It's almost a very literal translation of the game, but it's still very fun. Alicia Vikander is a great Lara Croft. I believe they were filming a sequel to it, but it was put on ice for now. But they're all three of them are good movies, honestly.
Okay. I mean, I haven't really heard anybody talking about them in a while, so I thought it seemed appropriate to bring them up.
Yeah. They're very decisive, definitely, even outside of the community.
Yeah, I mean the first two were just fun action movies for the time. But as somebody who's played the series, I think you're correct that they captured the essence of those games very, very well. And Angelina Jolie was kind of the perfect choice at that time to fill in that role.
Absolutely, she was fantastic. I think she elevated the whole character, even made her even more popular among the general population. So
yeah,
she left a big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the series was popular for gamers, but it didn't really stretch beyond that because why would it want to? So those movies definitely opened up that character to influence others and inspire others, hopefully. She's a very strong and kind of steadfast character.
Right.
You don't get that much in gaming, even now, for some reason.
Yeah.
So we've got history and geography in Tomb Raider on YouTube. We've got more parts coming that we are, you know, kind of all very excited about seeing. The first three are fantastic, and I commend your efforts because I know that is not.
Thank you so much.
Not easy at all. Is there anything else that you kind of want to plug out there, or is that really your big focus in terms of gaming and gaming history?
Yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. I'm trying to do something with my YouTube channel because it's sort of just been sitting there for a decade. I made it in 2008, I believe. And so with this series being as popular as it is, I think it's a good platform to spread history, to the public. And so I definitely want to focus on that. In terms of plugging, I just really want to thank everyone who worked with me on this series because, like I said, like you also emphasized, it's a big community effort, and you know, obviously without the narration, there wouldn't be the series because it would be pretty boring to look at a quiet 1 hour movie like that. But you know, everyone who contributed, Jenny Millward, who voiced the second, the third one, probably also the fourth one. Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for engaging with the series.
Okay, absolutely, and I kind of want to extend that thank you as well. as somebody who really enjoys the historical aspect of these games and historical gaming on its own, it's nice to see that a community, kind of comes together for this, and for a project
Right.
that I think it's more important than people realize that it is. As we watch gaming kind of get dumbed down every once in a while to, not to rag on it because it's a fine game, but games like Fortnite and Call of Duty Warzone, where there's the substance is just the gameplay. You kind of lose
Yeah.
track of these games that there's a lot of work put into the history, and a lot of it is either background material or just is something you glance over, and the development teams do kind of deserve the commendation for that effort. And then we've got creators like you who really highlight that. So again, thank you for putting that series together and for the amount of time I know goes into it. People
It's
like
my
us really
pleasure. It's my
appreciate
pleasure.
it. So I want to again
It
thank
definitely is a passion project anyway.
No, I mean that's great. That's great. Passion projects are hopefully usually come out to something, and you do have a good
Yeah.
amount of views on it. And YouTube's algorithm is always a nightmare to deal with. But the more you put out there, because you do have other stuff, you've got the polls that I noticed, and you've got music videos. So if you,
Right.
post when you can. But also, as you continue the series, I'm sure it'll catch the eye of somebody that'll really help push it out there more.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, I wanted to thank you again for for joining us here, Simon, taking the time to chat with us about your series and historical gaming. Again, that is History and Geography in Tomb Raider. You can find it on YouTube. And Simon, thank you again.
Thank you very much. It was very exciting to talk to you about this.